to figure out what happened to my sister, Lori. Her death was not ruled as a homicide. It was ruled as undetermined natural causes. A 15-year-old girl is going to walk about 10 miles, take all her clothes off in the woods, and then walk another 5 miles naked and lay down in a ditch and pull foliage over her. I never thought it would be solved, but don't ever give up. Somebody somewhere knows something. Now, 45 years later, I want to make sure families know there is hope. Good boy. What a good dog you are. He has the most beautiful blue eyes. Probably should have named him Paul after Paul Newman or Frank after Frank Sinatra. He has been licensed as an emotional therapy dog. He helps me when I talk about my sister. He will put one paw here and one paw here and let me just cry on his shoulder. I've told the story so many times. It never seems to get easier. I was in 8th grade at Eastmore Junior High School, and Lori was a sophomore. I was 13, she was 15. I'm the bratty little sister. It was a Friday night. Everybody went to the football game. Lori went to a couple people's parties after the football game. She was supposed to spend the night with one of her friends.
By 11 the next morning, Lori still hasn't come.
Started to make some phone calls to friends to see if anybody had seen Lori or she had spent the night somewhere.
They said no. The last that they had heard is Lori was just going to go home. She's going to walk home. It was 1974. We walked places.
And then she contacted the Columbus Police Department to file a missing persons report.
My mother was scared to death, but she would not portray that to me because she did not want to scare me.
Tony and Lori's mother, Joyce, is raising her 2 girls on her own.
My parents divorced. I'm not sure what year. I was really little. I want to say maybe 5.
Lori didn't let her parents' divorce stand in her way. She was focused and determined from a young age.
She was a kid, but she was so ahead of her time. She was a volunteer on McGovern's campaign in 1972.
I just want to warn the American people just as clearly as I can. Don't buy this Nixon lie.
So she would have been 12. I mean, wrap your head around that. 12 years old and is volunteering to work on a presidential campaign. She was off the charts smart, and she was extremely active in Israeli rights. My family is Jewish. She was so deep and so sensitive and so wanted to be a voice for anybody that didn't have one. Lori would never disappear. She might come home a little late, but never, ever would she disappear.
Lori had been missing for just a few hours when a call comes in to a police department in a nearby town.
A husband and wife were hunting for hedge apples, and they see a deceased young female laying in a ditch. Detectives responded, and they document that it's a white female in her late teens. She had no clothes on. She did have what appeared to be some bruising, not obvious to them what had caused the death of this young woman. They don't see any telltale sign like a rope around the neck or a gunshot wound or anything like that. And then they examine the bottom of her feet, which appear to be, for the most part, clean. It led the investigators after the fact to believe that whatever happened to the young woman happened somewhere else, and then she was left there on Rose Hill Road.
The coroner takes the Jane Doe's body to the morgue. The story hits the local news that night.
A friend of Lori's called the police department and notified them that a friend of his matched the description of the young woman that was found in Reynoldsburg, deceased.
Police ask Joyce Nesson to come to the morgue to identify her daughter's body.
She said, "I need to talk to you about Lori." And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, well, what about her?" And she said, "She's not coming home. She's gone. She died." I didn't understand. One minute she was there, the next minute she was gone.
The autopsy was conducted the next day. It was determined that she did have some kind of sexual relation with somebody, but it was not ruled that she was raped. And the manner of death was not ruled homicide. They just weren't able to determine what that reason was. It's possible that she had a drug overdose or she died of some other cause and was taken there by someone who panicked and dumped them. The toxicology report is still pending, and so they continue to investigate this as a suspicious death. So the investigators, they do just a number of different interviews with fellow friends, students, parents, just about anybody who had contact with her through the football game or any of these after parties. Lori was last seen by a friend leaving the party at about 10 after midnight. And then again, within a few minutes after that, two more friends.
Lori lives just a few minutes' walk away from the party she'd gone to. Lori's body was found miles away from her home. Investigators believe she'd accepted a ride from someone.
Everybody was very adamant about Lori would not get into a car with a stranger. No way. Okay? So the police said that she got into a car with someone she knew.
In my experience, people are killed by, more often than not, by people that they know.
This nice little Jewish group of kids now started looking at each other like, well, who did she get in the car with? We've never talked about Lori. Ever. It was too painful for my mom. I truly 100% believe that if Lori would have been an only child, I do not believe my mom would have survived it. She had me, so she still had to go on.
Lori's murder dominates the local news. And that leads to tips. One of those tips stands out above the rest.
They receive a call from a woman named Donna Upp, who worked at Mount Carmel East Hospital and had been on her way to work at around 5:45 in the morning. And she says, I recall seeing a girl dressed in similar clothing to what Lori Nesson was wearing when she went missing. She also reports that she saw a small red-colored car that was pulled off in a lane that to locals was called Lover's Lane. So they did focus on people that had access to their red car.
Scott Richards drove a red Mustang. Lori and Scott were like super, super close, like best friends. And he lived on the same street as us.
Scott Richards was around 16. He hosted the after party at his parents' house that she first went to after the football game. He was in her circle of friends and acquaintances. But her friends said he was strange and we think he could do something like that. It wasn't just like one person, and the more information you get on somebody, so police acted on that. They went and interviewed Scott Richards as the suspect. He's able, through his parents and himself, to account for his whereabouts and the time frame from the after party when she's found dead. So even though there may be some lingering doubts, there's no Ring door camera video and there's no cell phone GPSing, so they can't even really go out and verify someone's story. They have to take it at face value. Reynoldsburg police actually got a phone call that somebody had found shoes on the side of the road in Gahanna, which is a neighboring suburb. And then another report came in that the sweater and the jeans were found. The clothing was located approximately 3 miles from where Lori's body was found.
Lori's clothes and shoes are strewn along the right side of the road.
It would be logical to draw the idea that there were perhaps 2 people in the car when that clothing was thrown out. Someone's driving and then someone's in the passenger side from where the clothing went out the window. Earlier in investigation, the investigators came across information that Lori's mom had filed a report back in August of 1973.
According to the report, Lori, who was 14 at the time, was leaving school, but a man tried to lure her into his car. She escaped, ran home, and told her mother what happened.
An officer puts 2 and 2 together and says, I think I know who this is, because this is somebody that they had dealt with. His name was Eugene Guay. He was known to operate in that area on the east side of Columbus, and he would try and lure girls into his car. Mr. Guay was followed to a bar where it was noted that Mr. Guay had what looked like to be maybe like an infected laceration on his head or his face, and that he could have been injured in a struggle if Lori was fighting for her life. And they decide, hey, we should probably talk to this guy. He's very non-committal on his whereabouts. They actually have a photograph of her, and they show it to him. Not only does he recognize her, he makes a comment about, yeah, I didn't like her because she had braces. And so that raises some of the red flags for the investigators that this is somebody that we should really zero in on. Eugene Guay absolutely denied being involved with Lori's death. They offered him a polygraph, and he agreed to that.
The investigators received a phone message from the attorney that now represents Eugene Gouet, who says that he will not be taking the polygraph. They do get permission via consent to search his vehicle in the hopes that they might find something that would link Eugene Gouet to Lori Nesson, and they don't come up with any evidence. Once he retains an attorney, there really isn't anything left for them to do.
The toxicology results came back from Lori's autopsy, and there was no drugs or no alcohol in her blood.
Once they receive the final coroner's report, it's not ruled as a homicide. It's ruled as a accidental death from unknown origin. There's more questions than answers.
You didn't have to be some kind of brain to look at the circumstances surrounding her death and where her clothes were and where her body was in relation to where we lived. How anybody could rule that as anything but a homicide is beyond me.
The accidental death ruling means the end of the investigation. Lori's case goes as cold as Ohio's icy winter winds. Her family tries to pick up the pieces. Joyce wants to make sure Tony can lead a normal life.
My mom made me go back to school. She got me involved in riding horses. I played sports and got good grades, and my boyfriend was always a very, very vivacious person that loved to entertain, loved to go to parties, loved to dance, and then it all stopped. She went to work, and she came home. There was always something missing, and it was Lori. I always wondered who took my sister from me. At some point, there had to be some kind of answer somewhere, but I didn't know where to go or how to get it.
I came across the case August of 2019 while looking through the file room. That's what piqued my curiosity, is the death certificate did not list a manner of death as homicide. It was listed as undetermined.
Though he's not a detective, Patrol Officer Craig Bradford spends his free time re-examining local cold cases.
When Lori went missing, she was the same age as my daughter was. She was 15 years old. And I couldn't imagine going through the next 46 years with no answers.
Officer Bradford gets permission from the deputy chief to investigate the case on his own time. He gathers the case files and pores over the autopsy photos.
There were some injuries that were not listed. Some trauma may have been behind a left ear, but my aha moment was there was one photograph in particular of a detective that lifted up Lori's upper lip, and there was a lot of damage, which was consistent with possibly being rubbed against the top braces that Lori had. So someone could have been mashing her mouth down to try to keep her quiet. This was a clear, obvious homicide.
I never thought it would be solved because could it be it wasn't even ruled a homicide? All those years, nobody ever cared about what happened to her until Craig Bradford.
I felt she deserved answers. Her family deserved answers. And I thought that we had an opportunity now to do this, to do it right.
He said, well, I don't want to reopen an old wound, but I would like to talk to you about your sister. And literally, the minute he said that, it was like somebody punched me in the stomach. So the first thing that I said to Craig when I finally could catch my breath was, you can't reopen something that was never closed.
Before Bradford can move forward, he has to convince the coroner that Lori's death wasn't accidental and that she was murdered.
The county coroner and some of the other physicians would have to sit down and review all the aspects of the case before the elected coroner would sign off on it.
In September of 2020, after 5 months of deliberation, the coroner's office comes back with a decision.
The manner of death had been overturned from undetermined to homicidal violence.
Craig got her case reopened, and for the first time in 45 years, I felt that somebody actually cared about Lori. And so it was extremely emotional for me. And I mean, just look at can you see my hand? Just thinking about that.
That was extremely satisfying, but we still had an uphill battle on our hands because we still had an investigation to conduct. The two main people that had been looked at the time, Eugene Guay and a friend of Lori's, Scott Richard, had both passed away several years ago.
Detectives hope new forensic technology will give them a solid lead. They submit Lori's clothing to the crime lab for DNA testing.
Unfortunately, this case came in right before the start of the COVID pandemic, and that did slow progress. Like most of the country, we were working from home and definitely can't do DNA analysis from my house.
Suspects from 1975 have died. That, combined with the global pandemic, slows the case to a crawl.
Here it is November, and that's when I called Lieutenant Early, and I said, I'm going to the media. Somebody somewhere knows something, and we need to find that person.
Tony was very adamant about the fact that she wanted to run a news story on it. So one of our local reporters from a news channel here was willing to do that.
I get a phone call from my cousin. She says, have you seen this story on TV about Lori Neeson? I said, no, I haven't. And she said, well, this sounds just like Karen. So she called the police department.
17-year-old Karen Adams had been murdered just 6 months after Lori, back in 1975.
If you were to draw a straight line between the locations of both of those victims, it's probably only 2.5 miles at best. We felt very strongly that there might be a connection between these two crimes.
A detective from the Reynoldsburg Police Department contacted me in reference to a cold case homicide that I solved back in 2011. It was the Karen Adams case.
At the time of her murder, Karen Adams lived just 10 minutes from Lori Nesson. The night she was killed, 17-year-old Karen told her parents she was going out for about an hour. She drove off and never came back.
She said she was going to see a friend about a scarf that she'd left over there and was going to go get it. She'd be right back. 11 o'clock turned around and we knew something was going on then. Karen was never out late at night. The next morning, Karen was reported missing. I was driving around, talking with her friends, trying to find my sister. I found her car in a parking lot. I knew something was wrong. She would have never left that car. Never.
Just a few months earlier, Karen finally saved enough from waitressing to buy the 1965 Mercury.
I fixed it up a little bit for her, and I remember her taking me for a ride and how happy she was to have that car. That's the only memory that I kind of keep. Me and her riding around that car. Karen was the third of 5 children. 4 girls, 1 boy. I'm the oldest. She's special to our family. Had a great sense of humor. She was looking so much forward to her future.
It was roughly 6 to 8 miles east of Whitehall where Karen lived. 2 people just happened to look in the ditch and saw a body.
We got the call from the police. They'd found her body. It's like somebody just pulled my guts out of me. All I could think of was how Karen's last few moments were.
She had some marks on her neck, and once they took her from the scene and did the autopsy, obviously that was confirmed that 1, she was sexually assaulted, and 2, that she was strangled to death. There were no witnesses or fingerprints. Detectives followed as many leads as they could. They spent a good 6 months to a year on it. They interviewed everyone they could and ran out of leads.
The family was, hey, what are you people doing? I asked to see the file on Karen. They wouldn't show it to me. I just couldn't get any answers. I tried bribing people. That didn't help. And then it got colder and colder and colder, and pretty soon everybody forgets.
Cold case detective Chuck Clark is searching the database for an inactive case to take on when he finds Karen Adams' file.
Her case seemed to have one of the highest probabilities of being solved, mainly because DNA had come around.
A 2010 forensic test on
They put him in CODIS, which is the system that identifies suspects. 1 came back as unknown, and 1 was a known male that had done time in prison for rape and kidnapping, and his name was Robert Meyer.
Meyer had been arrested and convicted for raping and kidnapping 2 women in Toledo, Ohio in 1976, just a year after Karen Adams' murder. He spent 25 years in prison and was released in 2001.
When he was released, he was required to provide a DNA sample because of his conviction.
We just needed to get a DNA swab from him to verify the hit that I got in CODIS from the lab. We knocked on his door. Mr. Meyer was very cordial, very polite, and he was very compliant. So I got DNA swabs from each cheek and took those swabs right to the lab to be compared.
Detectives showed up my door. They said they had a DNA hit with CODIS. And as soon as they get the evidence confirmed, they were going to arrest him. It all came back like a flood. That same feeling that I got when I found out that Karen had got killed, I got again. They never told me the name. What they told me was it was a 71-year-old convicted rapist that was living in Cincinnati. Well, all you have to do is go to the Hamilton County Sex Offender website and figure out, how many 71-year-old guys you got there. One. I got an address off the website. I went down to see him. I took my gun. And I knocked on his door. I kept thinking about my sister's last moments and how bad I wanted to hurt Robert Meyer. I had a gun in my pocket. Inside my head was ringing like I'm just going to blow up. I stood within 2 feet of him, and I didn't see his face. I seen my mother's face. I just couldn't do it. He doesn't deserve that much attention. There's no way I could kill that man and put my mother through heartache over this. I just turned around and walked away.
As soon as we got the confirmation DNA, I had Mr. Myers transported to the Cincinnati Police Department Detective Bureau, where I conducted an interview.
Did you know of a female by the name of Karen Adams? Does that ring a bell with you at all or anything? Karen Adams? Sure don't.
I got the feeling that he actually didn't remember. I think it would have been possible. Who knows how many other crimes he committed against women.
How could you explain to me that I have DNA evidence that you sexually assaulted this girl that I'm speaking with you in reference to? I have no idea.
They arrested him. He pleads guilty to murder. He was convicted, sentenced 25 years in life. He died 4 years later.
Meyer's arrest and death bring some closure to the case. But the identity of Karen's other attacker is still a mystery.
I discovered that he had an accomplice in Toledo. That person's name was Charles Weber.
Robert Meyer and Charles Weber actually met in prison back in the early to mid 1960s. They lived together as soon as they get out of prison, and one of them's out of prison not 2 weeks, and we have Lori Nesson show up dead. Around 6 months later, we have Karen Adams, who is found dead. And then Weber and Meyer actually moved to Toledo, Ohio, and they attempted twice more to abduct, sexually assault, and murder 2 more victims. Charles Weber went to prison until 1989, and he was released, and he died 3 years later, so we didn't have the opportunity to get his DNA.
4 years later, in March of 2016, Detective Clark tracks down Charles Weber's murder was the second suspect in Karen Adams' murder.
It is such a relief to find out who did this and move on with your life and keep the memories of what you had that were good and let the rest of it go. But that is the hardest thing to do.
We received calls with people saying the news story about the death of Lori Neston. It sounded very similar to the death of Karen Adams. I contacted Devania Herdman at the DNA lab. She was actually familiar with the Karen Adams case because she had done the DNA analysis on it.
So I had started comparing Karen's profile from her underwear to the profile from Lori's jeans. They were identical. And not only did we get one foreign individual, but the same 2 foreign individuals that did this to Lori. I screamed. I screamed at my desk.
The DNA match and the stories from Weber and Myers' surviving victims lead to a theory about what happened the night Lori Nesson was murdered.
The women in Toledo said that they tried to approach them under the guise of needing help. And then once they got close to the car, they jump out and would grab them.
I think they forced her into the vehicle. They sexually assaulted her and then decided that killing her was the best way of concealing their crime.
Convinced that Weber and Myers killed Lori, investigators finally have answers for Lori's sister, Tony.
Once Craig told me that Lori's case had been solved and they're both dead, I think I did ask, is there any way that we could exhume their bodies so that I could run over them with my truck multiple times? I'm very upset that they never had to pay for what they did to my sister. But I can't spend the rest of my life being concerned with them. So what we did on July 13th, which was my 60th birthday, we did a very small memorial service at the graveside, both that Lori's case was solved and that they could rest in peace.
Me and Tony Hesson has become very good friends over this. We'll always be in this together. And we talk quite often about the need to do shows like this, to get the word out. Law enforcement and the families all believe that there are other victims out there. We're sure of that. If you know of anybody that sounds like this story, contact your local authorities.
I want to make sure that these families out there and friends don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. There's always some sort of hope. And if my story can help